for these last 9 weeks, 9 continuous weeks. We've been reading, the first reading has been from the Hebrew Scriptures, beginning in Genesis, leading through the stories of the patriarchs, and then to the story of the Exodus, and then to the story of the Judges. And today and tomorrow we complete that long arc of history recounted to us through the Bible. Today and tomorrow we end with the story of Ruth, which is kind of the end of the Judges period, if you will, of the history of the Jewish people. And Ruth is an important kind of a linchpin figure between the world that we've been considering and what is about to come. Not to give anything away, but you notice at the end of today, where did they end up? In Bethlehem. So that should give you a clue as to where this might be going, and the place of Ruth in the story. Well, certainly after yesterday's tragic, horrific reading, this is a charming little story, right? About two simple women, really, right? We had Naomi, who had a husband. She's a Jewish woman, right? And goes off to live in Moab, which is, again, one of these kind of places where the non-Jewish folk lived, if you will. And her husband dies, and she has 2 sons, and they marry Moabite women, and both of the sons die. And Naomi, kind of in her charity, says, you're both kind of young women. Why don't you go back to your own people and your own God, and, maybe you can start up a new life there. Again, think about the culture of this time. A young widow was kind of a relatively vulnerable figure, right? It's not like she was going to go out and get a job. That didn't exist in those times, right? And indeed, one of the daughters-in-law, Orpah, does. She goes back to her own country. But Ruth has a great love, not only for Naomi, her mother-in-law, but for Naomi's God. And there's that beautiful expression, do not ask me to abandon or forsake you, for wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. What a wonderful sentiment, right? That Ruth, out of a great sense of love for Naomi, love for Naomi's God, our God, if you will, is willing to let go of all that, let go of her own people, her own family and such. And in great love and service to this older widow to help her, right? During a very difficult time, it's a kind of a famine time. And indeed, as we hear, they will travel off to Bethlehem, and you'll find out tomorrow what happens there. But I think the message is so important. It's an expression of the gospel reading, right? What are the great commandments? Love God and love neighbor. Ruth is certainly an excellent example of someone who does that, right? She has come to know about the one true God. She loves that God, and she loves her mother-in-law. And she's willing to let go of everything else in order to pursue that love, right? To leave her family behind, to leave her own land, her tradition. Following the Lord, being a loving person is incredibly demanding, right? It makes demands of us. It calls us to be open to new experiences, to be willing to accept uncertainty in life, right? In order to be faithful. And there's this wonderful dynamic here of loving God and loving neighbor. They go together. You can't, as Jesus tells us today, you really can't have one without the other. you really can't say that you love God if you hate your neighbor, right? The two things have to go together. They have to be in sync, right? And indeed, all the other laws, all the other commandments follow from that. Everything else is commentary. Right? Loving God and loving neighbor is what it means to be a human person. Right? And everything else, all the other commandments, everything else we do, right, hopefully comes from that. You know, we in the Catholic tradition have a lot of stuff, right? We have all kinds of things that we do, right? And those are all, hopefully, all those things help us to live out the great commandment. Because sometimes it's very easy to be a good Catholic and a lousy Christian, right? You can do all the stuff, right? Follow all the rules. But if you don't have a loving heart, what's there, really? Right? Love God, love neighbor. And in these last 2 days of this wonderful going through the history of the Jewish people, we're left with this wonderful figure of Ruth, a great role model for us. We ask the Lord to help us to be more like her, to follow her good example in her own way of loving God and loving neighbor.